Hi, everybody. My name is Nisha Devasia, and on behalf of my co-authors, I'm excited to present on our work, I Would Not Be This Version of Myself Today, expanding on the eudaimonic effects of gameplay. The idea of eudaimonia is broadly defined as living life in a full and deeply satisfying way. Eudaimonia is often contrasted with hedonia, which refers to general enjoyment and the attempt to elicit positive affective states. In HCI game studies, hedonic experiences mediated by factors such as flow and user engagement have been the dominant paradigm. However, we've recently started to additionally investigate eudaimonic gaming experiences, which entail gaining insight and appreciation for the personal search for meaning in life through play. When conceptualizing what a eudaimonic gaming experience actually is and how it forms, Postler's initial model breaks it down into four parts. First, the motivation, or why somebody might be seeking this type of experience. Second, the game use, or the interaction between the player and the game. Third, the experience, or the affective states of play. And finally, the effects, which are the outcomes of somebody having this type of experience. While the first three elements have been relatively well conceptualized, the outcomes are less well defined. And that's what we wanted to look at in this study. So to that end, we asked the following research questions. First, what perceived outcomes or effects result from eudaimonic gaming experiences? And second, what components of eudaimonic gaming experiences might influence these perceived effects? So in our related work, we cover three main areas. First, we looked at how eudaimonic effects have been investigated in other media formats such as music, movies, videos, and social media. Outcomes included altruism, intergroup connectedness, prejudice reduction, perceptions of self-meaning, and pro-social motivations. Second, we looked at a lot of literature around self-determination theory. The three main principles of self-determination theory are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. While autonomy and competence in games have been pretty well researched, relatedness in games is a bit poorly defined and has traditionally relied on multiplayer mechanics and connection to other people. We draw heavily from Tyack and Wyatt's suggestions to expand this definition to include parasocial relationships, game development culture, and game artifacts themselves. We also draw from Tyack and Meckler's suggestions to engage with the subtheories of SDT, and in this paper we focus a lot on OIT, or organismic integration theory, which concerns the internalization and integration of personal values. Finally, a lot of literature has talked about the effects of playing video games, and specifically the negative effects of playing video games. However, this literature faces a lot of ongoing publication bias, so we don't engage with it that much in this work. Broadly, there are four main categories of positive effects of video games, which are cognitive, motivational, emotional, and social. So for our methods, we sent out a survey to 166 participants that we recruited from convenience sampling on these three means, and we also used Prolific. And the data was collected over 4 months last year. With regards to the survey itself, we asked participants to discuss a meaningful gaming experience and how it affected their lives, which included the questions here on this slide, as well as background information about the game in question, what their life was like at the time of play, and the elements of the gameplay that they found particularly salient. So for our analysis, we took a mixed method approach to analyze all of our survey responses. On the qualitative side, we used Postler's model as a theoretical framing and derived deductive codes for the parts of the model that are well defined in the literature, namely the motivation, the game use, and the experience. We have a very extensive coding scheme that you can read more about in the paper. But for the effects, since they're less well defined in the literature, we did inductive thematic analysis on all the questions in the survey responses that regarded the outcomes of the gaming experience. On the quantitative side, we wanted to investigate if there were any particular motivations, game uses, or experiences with which correlated to certain effects. To do this, we ran our coded dataset through a generalized linear mixed model using binomial logistic regression. So to answer our first research question, which was what types of effects result from eudaimonic gaming experiences, our inductive thematic analysis yielded 5 themes, which are presented here. And to expand a bit more on that, we can look at our final codebook. So inward-focused outcomes included self-reflection, self-acceptance, self-confidence, changes in identity and worldview. With regards to career, it primarily related to career-related skills that people use in their existing careers or developed to get a new career. Third, we had perceived health benefits, and these were primarily physical and mental. For learning, we had not only new skills and knowledge, but also opportunities to practice existing skills and gain individual life skills. And finally, for social connection, this included both meaningful connections with new people, strengthening existing connections with, for example, family, and gaining general people skills. These were the number of people who we classified as falling under each theme, and you'll notice that there were a few people who weren't able to specify exactly how they believed the game had an effect on their life, and there were a couple of people who believed that the game did not affect them long term. From our generalized linear mixed model, we identified certain components of the person and their experience that might have correlated to certain outcomes. First, we saw that one of the game uses, which was gaining insight from the game narrative, positively correlated to inward-focused effects such as reflection. Second, we saw potential positive correlation with social interactions within the game habitus and influences on people's careers. And finally, we saw that one of the motivations, which was playing during a time of personal stress, was positively correlated to people's perceiving that the game experience had health benefits for them. This is an example of one of the 5 diagrams that we have in the paper, each of which correspond to one of our 5 effects. You'll see that this diagram is about inward-focused effects in particular. You can see that there were no motivational elements on the leftmost side that came up as significant to the formation of inward-focused effects, but that one of the game use elements, they're not all shown here because there are a lot of them, but the one here is, as I mentioned previously, gaining insight from the narrative, as well as one of the experiential elements, which was being emotionally moved or challenged, are highlighted in green, and that means that they had a positive correlation with people reporting inward-focused effects. Now, the element highlighted in red was the experiential element of playing with other people, and that was negatively correlated with inward-focused effects, which makes sense because this primarily concerned individual reflection in single-player games. In our discussion, we talk about how, in most cases, people don't really seek eudaimonic outcomes unless they're playing in times of personal stress. We label this distinction as seeking intentional versus incidental eudaimonia. We also talk about what it might look like to better scaffold people's game experiences to lead to certain effects. For most people, that took a really long time. All of our participants were reporting on this game experiences an average of 7 years after the time of play. So it took a lot of reflection and processing for them to conclude that it had an effect on their life. We also discussed potential pathways from eudaimonic game experiences to opportunities for informal learning and career development. And finally, we talk about how while escapism is generally viewed as a motivation for play, there's a distinction between self-suppressive and self-expansive escapism. This is a dichotomy proposed by Stenseng et al. But this is something that eudaimonic models might help differentiate because a lot of people, while they started with the intention of self-suppressive escapism, the escapism became something meaningful in and of itself, so we viewed it as more of a self-expansive experience. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to discussing this paper more at KitePlay.